perspective. Just, please.
I have a question of what role is Iran going to play in helping or hindering this two-state solution?
What role is Iran going to play in helping or hindering the two-state solution? Anybody want to take that one?
I'll take a quick swing at it. I think the continued existence of the conflict has been a trump card that Iran has been exploiting to undermine the legitimacy and credibility of some Arab governments that it has disagreements with, and as a way of causing trouble for the United States. The Iranian commitment to Palestinian rights has, in my view, always been somewhat opportunistic. Certainly back in the 1980s, it was not an issue they cared very much about at all. They began to engage in it in the aftermath of the Madrid conference and the American policy of dual containment as a way of, again, sort of countering what they perceived as things we were doing to them. So if you want to try and undermine Iran's ability to cause trouble in that part of the world, you take that card away by getting a peace deal. It's also worth noting that despite the many offensive things that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has said about Israel, he has said in an interview with, I think, George Stephanopoulos on ABC News that Iran would abide by any agreement that the Palestinians reached with Israel. And other Iranian officials have said much the same thing. So again, a two-state solution actually helps on that front as well.
Please, Don.
What are the prospects of the Palestinians unilaterally declaring independence state, and what will be the consequences?
Everett, do you want to take that?
Of course, the Palestinians have already once unilaterally declared an independent state in 1988, but when they recognized Israel. They've not pursued that until quite recently. And the recent moves have been of a very specific sort, with negotiations stalled and their judgment that this current Israeli government might not be willing or in a position to successfully negotiate an agreement. What they've said is, let's move ahead and create all those things which a state needs to have in order to serve its people. So that the set of moves that Prime Minister Salam Fayyad has carried out in terms of creating the state infrastructures, creating the bureaus, the institutes, the security forces trained incidentally by the Americans, all of these have been building what can be a state. And the question becomes, what will happen then if Salam Fayyad's date, September 2011, passes and there's been no successful negotiations? Will the Palestinians then say, we will go it alone? What we've noticed is their efforts internationally to line up countries to back them. And if you followed the newspapers coming and then reports coming out of South America, well over half the major countries of South America have recognized an independent state of Palestine within the 1967 borders, with adjustments to be made. Similarly, they are moving toward gaining acceptance of things like that from Europe. How far it'll go, we don't know. Will it solve the conflict? No. The conflict will still go on until Israel comes to terms with the notion that they have to deal successfully with a Palestinian state which much of the world recognizes as legitimate.
So it doesn't eliminate the need for negotiations, but it does move forward. Yep. Jackie, I saw your hand.
In regards to the papers released by Al Jazeera and the insistence of Israel to continue to build settlements during any sort of negotiations that were going on, how do you convince the conservatives in Israel that peace is more important than, say, asserting your sovereignty to the rest of the world? It feels like when I was watching this afternoon on the news, that asserting their sovereignty is more important to conservatives in Jerusalem than any sort of peace.
There's no doubt that that segment of the Israeli population is going to be very hard to persuade, and I think this takes hardball politics. the importance, for example, of the U.S. being very clear on the illegality of the settlements is this not only changes the tenor of the discussion about the settlements, but it also empowers the Europeans, who, despite the fact that they deem those settlements illegal, often take a cue from the U.S. in terms of how firmly they're going to negotiate import restrictions on goods produced in the occupied territories and so on. So I think if you're serious, you've got to play hardball, and you have to speak clearly on the status of the settlements. And I think that undermines the resolve of the conservative segment of the Israeli polity. I should say also that we're providing the Israelis about $3 billion a year in military aid, and that money is fungible. And what we're doing, in effect, is subsidizing the Israeli provision of services to those settlements by allowing them to use money for those settlements that they would otherwise have to spend for other security purposes. So if we're serious, we can play hardball with the finances as well. I don't see that coming, however.
If I can add just one quick word. This last October, I led a group from Harvard in a trip to Israel and Palestine. And one of our final meetings was at the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv. And the group of Israelis there was led by a retired, former, very senior general who had been director of Israeli military intelligence for a good number of years. It's a man I've known for some time. And in a very candid mood, he turned to the group and said, "Don't expect serious negotiations from Israel now. Life is too good here. There's very little terror. The economy is working well. There's not a push to bring about change." And in the most pessimistic assessment I'd heard him make in the 20 years I've known him, he said, what it will take is another Palestinian uprising, a resort to violence, after which Israel will seriously sit down and negotiate. I hope he's wrong, but I must admit I was, how would you say, I listened carefully because this guy has known what he's been talking about for years, and I'd never heard him as pessimistic.